Hello and welcome to a tutorial for the Nice to Gnome You gnome. It's time for us to pick up stitches from the hat and knit the body. So what we need to do is this row that we marked with scrap yarn, we are going to be picking up from it using the scrap yarn to help us figure out things. On this side, it's really easy and obvious to see when we've switched from garter stitch to stockinette. On the inside, which is where we need to be working, it is much harder to see reverse stockinette to garter. So I have gone and put black yarn in here because the yarn that I used, my color 4, which is this color, I had it in there, and in person this worked as contrast yarn, but on the camera we couldn't see it at all. So I have switched to black yarn and that will hopefully work. So what we need to be doing is we need to be picking up stitches, but we have to be doing it on the inside where it's going to be a little trickier. But obviously if we were to pick up stitches here and knit down, this whole brim would sort of flip up and be inside, and that's not what we want. So we need to flip things. Now, just before I flip, I'm just going to note the back of the hat, the side without this peak, has the seam where we switched from purling to knitting for a garter. And so that is going to be our beginning of round. If you find it really hard to find the stitch that lines up with that on the inside, you can pick up starting over here, but you will need to then rearrange your stitches so that the start of the round lines up with this seam here. When you do this, you're going to need to kind of be pulling it apart to see where that yarn goes. I can see that it's here and it's coming out there. So what that means is it's gone through this strand there. Each of the places we need to pick up is going to correspond with a bump here. So I've got this one done. So I know that somewhere around here is going to be my next one. One bump, next bump. It is not the easiest thing to necessarily see, but it is a lot easier than doing it without the contrasting yarn. So there, see that bump goes to there. We've got the next bump, we've got the black yarn showing us. And of course it's really hard with the small stitches to show you, but I can see the black yarn right in there, and I can see that it's going under these two strands of yarn, because of course we're holding the yarn doubled. So then we'll be doing it again, following that yarn, doing it again. All right, so I'm gonna finish picking up the stitches. Try to be careful that you don't pierce the black yarn. If you pierce the black yarn or whatever your contrast yarn is, you will find when you go, you've got all the stitches picked up and it's time to pull and to remove that contrasting yarn, it won't pull out because you'll have speared it. You can then go in with scissors and kind of snip where you need to snip, but it will be easier if you avoid piercing it. So that's all there is to it. We're gonna pick up on the thin needles. Then we join the yarn and we use the actual size needles, but it's a lot easier to pick up stitches with thinner needles. This isn't the only stage of the gnome where we're going to be using thin needles. So for those of you traveling or on the go, keep the thin needles around for later in the gnome. But right now I'm going to finish picking up and then we'll come back and we'll talk about starting knitting. All right, I've worked my way around. I can see that I'm in line with the seam, which I can double check if I flip over. You can see that I've left the yarn in. For now, I'm going to leave it in just as a way to reassure you that if you're worried that you might not have had it right, it's kind of hard to flip over and make sure that you're in the same spot because, of course, your needle will be showing, taking up the space that you used to be able to see the contrasting yarn in. But on the other hand, if you flip it over and you can't see any contrasting yarn, that means that you haven't accidentally grabbed the wrong spot. So one thing that can occasionally happen is that people write me and say, I've knit my body in reverse stockinette, I'm not sure what I did wrong. Well, when we are picking up stitches, it is sometimes something people do that they look at the stitches here, they join yarn and they work across here. And if you do that, you will end up with a reverse stockinette. What you always need to be doing is, if you see the difference here, we've got the flat of the triangle here, whereas the point is towards us, that will be knitting inside out. Whereas if we switch so that we are knitting this way with the flat of the triangle to us and the point away, then you will be knitting with the right side out. So we need to figure out where we start. So this is obviously not the starting place because I said this was the front of the hat. So we're going to go find this spot with the seam. So I'm going to take my color 1 and color 4. I'm going to join them, leaving a tail for sewing in. I'm going to kind of line that up with my spot, and I'm going to be knitting on this with the point facing away. I like to tuck the ends into the hat so that I don't accidentally pick them up or do other things with them. So we've got the stitches on the small needles. So the key thing to remember is to always knit onto the size needle that we want. So just start knitting and we're off. That's all there is to this. The flat of the triangle towards us means we're knitting with the right side out. You can see here that means that we can see stockinette on the side we're working on. If we were to be working on this side, if you look in, we can't see stockinette. So when you're working in the round, as you've picked up stitches, you want to be able to see stockinette, then you know that as you knit, you will be making stockinette and not reverse stockinette. I hope that helps you pick up stitches, and I hope you have a great time with beginning the body. Have fun, happy knitting, and happy gnoming.